Hello, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This is Anesia Baptiste for Serving the People. Today, I come to you from a little cafe in the city of Montreal, or Montreal, as the French say, in Quebec, Canada. And I'm holding in my hand a recent shadow report on the state party of St. Vincent and the Grenadines that looks at violence against women and girls. And this report has been presented to the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women at its 61st session in November 2014. But this report was done by the University of Quebec in Montreal by its International Clinic for Defense of Human Rights. And I have the pleasure of speaking now with two very important persons who had an impact or who were involved in doing this report. Professor Mirja Trilsch, it was under her direction that the report was done, and also one of the students involved in the research and drafting, Miss Jeanne Ricard. Professor Trilsch and Jeanne, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Greet the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and let's have a discussion about this report.
Yeah, so it's not a UN report, it's more of a shadow report. We call it shadow report because it's a report drafted by members of civil society. So it's intended to write about subjects that governments in their government report don't talk about, or just talk it about the way that civil society want to yeah. Yeah, thank you.
I understand very well.
Well, the state had already submitted its own report to the UN, so this is just a report to show what the situation looks like from the perspective of civil society, and to highlight some of the issues that were maybe not explicitly mentioned in the state report, and to show the extent of some of the shortcomings. So it's we're trying to complete the information that is available to the committee, so the committee can make informed recommendations about the situation that Vincentians can benefit from.
Okay, thank you so much. How did you get involved in doing this report? Was it requested by persons in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? How did you get involved?
We actually got alerted to the issue by social workers here in Montreal at the Maison Bleue and at the Mouvement contre le viol et l'inceste, which are two social work organisms here in Montreal who work with immigrant women. And they receive a large number of women from St. Vincent who report about rape and about incest, and they realize that, it's such a small country, but it seems to be a big problem. So they actually started their own research and then realized, that they couldn't do that as a small project on the side, and asked us if we could help and actually take some international action to draw attention to the problem. So that's when we came in, and then we contacted people on the ground and got in contact with the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Human Rights Association to document the situation.
Well, Jeanne, I remember you contacted me by email to ask some questions and to ask for assistance with certain statistics and so on. Could you tell me a little bit about your experience as a student doing this research? Is it for a project that you had to do for a degree program? Just tell us who you are in terms of what you're studying, and tell me what your experience has been like doing this work.
So it's part of a class that we call Clinique Internationale de Défense des Droits Humains. It's an international clinic of defense of human rights. So I've got credits for this for this report. Each semester, some students are put on cases, legal cases, so we can try to do practical work, and it's really accomplishing for students because we can actually do something real. It's not just learning laws or reading treaties. It's more practical, and we really feel the usefulness of what we are studying.
And I think too that it must be satisfying to know that you can actually be a part of making good recommendations to improve the situation of women in a country.
Yeah, we hope we do. So yeah, it's a great experience. The clinic it's really nice, and we were working a lot on the semester on research and writing, and Mirja were there for helping us in the writing part because we're not, as you can hear, we're not English speakers, so there was a bit of a difficulty there for us. But at the end, it was a big accomplishment just for the students, and we are hoping it can be useful for at least the committee for against discrimination against women, and for Vincentian people.
Thank you so very much for your hard work, and I wish you all the best with your academic program. Okay. Now, Mirja, I want us to get into some of what the report actually highlights about the situation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines where violence against women and girls are concerned. I know that one of the issues is the weaknesses in legislation. I want us to talk about that. Could you tell Vincentians in a summary what are some of the main weaknesses you have identified in the legislation which affects the way women and girls are protected from violence and from discrimination in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? Okay.
So the report actually highlights, I would say, 3 issues, one of which are problems with the legislation. Let's just say the legislation, there is legislation specifically with respect to domestic violence. There's the Domestic Violence Act. However, there are a few shortcomings which result in the protection that is offered to women being inefficient, meaning that women do not necessarily always immediately have protection, and the protection does not always go far enough. So one of the things we highlight is, for example, that the Domestic Violence Act only allows a procedure between private parties. It does not allow for criminal proceedings. So the abuser is not going to be prosecuted and not punished under the Domestic Violence Act. There is the criminal code for criminal proceedings. However, it does not contain a specific provision on domestic violence. There are other issues with the provisions in the criminal code about rape, for example, and about incest. Some victims are not protected because the provisions are not specific enough. So we highlight all these things. The other thing that we highlight is how, for example, you can ask for a protection order under the Domestic Violence Act. A woman that is battered can go to the state agencies and ask for a protection order. However, that does not necessarily immediately give her access to a protective environment. So, in order to have access to the crisis center, which exists in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there are a lot of administrative steps that have to be taken, and in the meantime, the woman is without protection, and her children as well. And so a lot of what is provided for under the Domestic Violence Act is not operationalized. It's not efficient in practice because the woman is not sufficiently protected.
isn't it also true that it doesn't go broad enough in terms of covering all types of relationships? Because in 2011, one of the things I highlighted in my work as a senator was that there was no opportunity for a woman involved in what is called a visiting relationship to access a protective order. In other words, a woman who doesn't live with her boyfriend or her spouse, but they visit each other, they're in a relationship, and he hits her or abuses her, she can't get a protective order because of the nature of that relationship. So ultimately, it's as if she's discriminated against by the very law that is supposed to protect her and other women, all women and all girls from that kind of violence. Isn't that also true? And did you find that too?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's one of the shortcomings of the Domestic Violence Act. And from what we understood after having talked to Vincentian women is that there are a lot of such visiting relationships, and marriage is not necessarily the rule. It's not the overwhelming majority of relationships that are where people are married. So it's an important shortcoming of the Domestic Violence Act, and it just highlights how it is, I think there's good intentions behind that act, but it leaves many women without protection in the end, and the delays are too long, and the social services that are offered are not vast enough. It's not efficient enough.
Let's talk about the inefficiency of the social services. We do have a crisis center in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, recently operationalized. I recall when I was in Parliament, I spoke about it a lot because it had been promised for quite a while, and I felt that we were dragging our feet on it. What did your study find about the crisis center's operationalization and its efficiency or inefficiency accordingly? What did you find in your study about that? I don't know which one of you want to say something.
So what we learned was that the crisis center seems to be up and running. We don't know where it is, and I don't think it would be good to divulge its where it is. However, we also learned that, first of all, there are administrative hurdles in order to have access to the center. Women need to have asked for a protection order first before being or having the possibility of being referred to the crisis center. There are only 10 places, meaning there's space for 10 persons at the crisis center, and the impression we got when writing up the report is that the need seems to be much bigger than that. And the maximum length of stay is 3 months, and the legal proceedings against the abuser may not actually be terminated after 3 months. So a woman may have to leave the crisis center before being in security.
So let me just break this down a bit for my people, because it's really shocking to my mind that in order to access a protective order, you have to apply for that order. There would be proceedings to determine if you should get it. Those proceedings could last more than 3 months. And therefore, while you're, so to speak, if you get the protective order and you're in protection in the crisis center, you have to wait, correct, for the outcome of the legal proceedings. And if it lasts more than 3 months, you could be out again before you get some sort of justice against your perpetrator. So where does that leave the woman in terms of protection?
Well, exactly. From what we understand, there is a possibility for that to happen. Now, I'm not on the ground. I can't tell you how often that happens, and I don't want to say that that happens regularly. I don't have any statistics about that, but there's a possibility for that to happen. So I don't think that there should be a maximum length for the stay. I think that a woman should be entitled to stay until she is protected. So that should be the criterion for how long she has access to the crisis center. There should always be a procedure in place to make sure that she has sufficient protection before she has to leave the center. That's I think that's the minimum condition.
In page 14 of your report, you talked about complaints of gender-based violence not taken seriously. What aspects of your interaction proved that? What evidence did you gather which suggested to you that complaints of gender-based violence are not taken seriously in St. Vincent and the Grenadines?
So from testimony that we got in the research process, we actually found out that some police officers don't take complaints seriously. Sometimes they just tell women to get home and talk to their husband or boyfriend and just figure it out for themselves. So that's what we found from testimony. I don't know if you want to...
Well, it's just there's a lot of different sources out there that seem to confirm that the approach is not gender sensitive, meaning that a woman who comes and complains, she will not necessarily be referred to a female police officer. She may have to testify, in the middle of the police station where everybody can overhear what she's saying. And I mean, these are sensitive issues, telling somebody you have been abused or raped, that's difficult to do for a woman. So, she should be in a place where she's comfortable, and if she's more comfortable to talk to a woman, she should be able to talk to a woman instead of a man. And she should be assured confidentiality of what she is saying. So I know that St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a small country, is a small society, so protecting the confidentiality of such information is crucial to establishing confidence in women who want to come out and speak about what happened to them. So, a closed room where she can talk to whoever she wants to talk to. If it's a male or a female police officer, it should be her choice. So those are just some of the issues where we think the response is not 100% adequate.
I want to raise some things around this point because of what I've found out when I was speaking to different persons. First of all, I got the impression from some police officers when speaking to them that they're in a sort of dilemma sometimes, because they claim that sometimes a woman comes, she complains that, okay, my boyfriend beat me up or something, and then they say they do their jobs, they take it seriously, but then when the time comes for her to give evidence or to really pursue the proceedings, she maybe changes her mind and says, oh, I don't want to do it again. And it has been suggested to me that this has created a sort of dilemma for police officers doing their work in this area sometimes, because they feel that maybe sometimes they take it for granted that this is just another case of, oh, you have a little problem and you're going to change your mind tomorrow. How do you react in your mind from your work and so on? Have you met this kind of reasoning before, and how do you react to that sort of scenario?
I think there are two issues here. First of all, from what we learned about the situation, there seems to be a big problem of impunity. So even when women do complain and they do pursue the proceedings, often the outcome is very unsatisfying. So I think the numbers of women who abandon their complaints is also due to the fact that the complaints in the end, they don't produce much of an outcome. So, if you don't feel taken seriously, why would you go through having to testify again and again? And, it's just the burden for the women sometimes maybe seems disproportional to the outcome. So I think that's there's a lot of frustration. And the other issue is that, domestic violence is a complex problem, and it's not something that is specific to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that women who are abused end up abandoning their complaints over and over again. That happens in every society all over the planet. which does not mean that you should not take their complaints serious anymore. These are victims. You have to remember they're victims of abuse by a person they considered a loved one until, they got hit for the first time. So they're traumatized. They may be suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. They have children, they have dependents. They're in a difficult situation. So, you cannot always ask for a logical, rational response from a victim. And I mean, I think that's why it's so important to accompany them and to make it clear that, if you don't want this to happen again, you need to be strong, and we're going to help you to do that. So if you don't feel supported in the process, it makes it more likely that the woman is going to abandon.
I understand. I have heard from the police department. Did you encounter this? Because I learned that there were efforts, for example, to establish in something like a rape unit where women could go directly to that unit, and they could, have rape kits available immediately for their complaints, and they could have access to women police officers, to police officers who are specifically trained to handle that sort of thing. In your research, did you discover any information about any such moves on the part of the government police department?
I'm not aware of that. No, sorry.
No, me neither.
Okay, I was just wondering. Okay, there's a question of affordability of just access to justice. You raised that also in your report. Tell me about your findings in that regard.
Well, the thing is that there is little legal aid available to victims. So, women who do decide to pursue legal proceedings, they're often on their own because they can't afford a lawyer. So there is only one organism in St. Vincent, which is the St. Vincent the Grenadines Human Rights Association, which offers some pro bono legal aid. And that's just not sufficient. I mean, I guess they would need a lot more support to take care of all the victims who need legal aid. So I guess that is one of the recommendations of our report. The social services that are out there and are helping, they should receive more support doing that, because it is so important to have access to a lawyer who can explain to you the legal proceedings and what's going to happen, who prepares you for your testimony. I mean, it's traumatizing for a victim to give testimony about abuse in court. So there should be somebody by your side who tells you in advance what is going to happen, and who can prepare you for that.
And you mentioned recommendations, which I know you've made in the report, and that's always a very important aspect. And these recommendations that you have made, they've pretty much been made to the UN committee, is that correct? Recommendations in the report to the committee that you're saying as an NGO, these are the things we think St. Vincent and the Grenadines needs to do based on our findings. What would be, if you would like to highlight any of them, I know there are quite a few bullet points, but if you would like to highlight any of them in terms of urgency, what would they be? And tell us a bit about what happens henceforth in terms of after this has been submitted to the UN committee. What's the next step? So the issue of which recommendations you would like to highlight, and what happens after this?
I think which recommendation would I highlight? There's many. So there's about 4 pages, I think, of recommendations, and I think there's not only there's not one single recommendation that by itself is going to make the difference. So I think it needs to be a concerted effort to put into place a few things that are going to make things better. So one of the things will be training for state officials, for police officers, for judges. Another thing would be protective services for women. Another thing would be a public campaign. I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done, because it's a good thing to help women who have become the victims, but what can we do to prevent women from becoming victims? So I think a public campaign in schools, for example, would be very helpful. So that, now I mentioned 3 things that put together are going to have an impact. Each one of them may have a small impact, but not as strong an impact. So if all comes together, that's where you create an impact. As to what is to come now, we're looking into how to first of all, we need to wait for the response from the committee, see if the committee will how can I say, use any of our recommendations and put it in their final observations, call on the state to do some of those things. This is the first time that a civil society report on domestic violence as such was submitted to the committee. So we'll see what they'll do with it, and then I think it's important to make this report known to women in St. Vincent. I think it's important for people on the ground, people like you, to tell others about it and say, look, some of the problems are highlighted in this report. Let's take it seriously and let's work on towards the realization of some of these recommendations, and let's do something about it. So I hope we got a stone rolling here.
Any final words, Jeanne?
Yes.
Yeah. Any final words you want to share with us?
Yes, so the session of St. Vincent at the committee is it's in July, so we are looking forward the session to hear what questions they will raise and what will be the response of the government, because they will have to put this on paper, what ways they are taking the problems and what means they will take for addressing the problem. So we're looking forward, and we hope that a lot of people will hear from it with a lot of activities, media activities like yours.
Thank you so very much, ladies. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I will share with my community of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I will do my part as well. I have been researching, I've been looking at other legislations in the region, looking not only at domestic violence, but even at the issue of sexual offenses against children, girls, and so on, and strengthening laws to give minors more power to be able to report and have their testimonies recognized in court, things like that. And I'm really concerned about it, but I realize that we need to do more than talk. We need to actually have action, and I'm very serious about legislative reform. I don't think we are moving fast enough and wide enough in changing our laws to give strength and power to victims and potential victims. And I also agree with you that education is very important, because often, for lack of knowing what the law says and even knowing what the penalties are and can be, perhaps some perpetrators and would-be perpetrators get away or take for granted certain things, and then the victims are not empowered because they don't know their rights. So sensitization about the law, about how it protects you, about what are the measures you can take, about what is available to you to protect you, is very important. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.
All the best with your work, all the best, and continue to serve humanity, right? God bless you all, okay?